we'll have to see if we can use Zoom or not. You know, whenever we get into Unity and all of these tools that are so resource intensive, sometimes we can't use some of the other tools that we would like to use. All right, so here I am in Unity, and I said, well, try to create some 3D objects and things while you're messing around, because there are so many different things that you can do. How can I do it? Well, I can come up here and use the menus, and I could start out saying I want to create an asset. Let's say I want to create, I'd sort of like maybe a folder. Maybe I want to organize everything. Maybe I want some other cubes or different things like that. I could create some 3D game objects. So when you look across your menus, you're going to see lots of different options, different things that you can create. And some of these are just predetermined shapes, objects that you can use, and then you can move them around and change things however you want when you're working in your project. So we have our first project created, and we've got our scene saved. So now what we're looking at here, this gray area, we could consider this to be our canvas, right? Because that's where we're going to do all of our design. So we could do all sorts of different things with our canvas. Let's try just playing our game. Right now I don't have anything on this scene, but if I click the play button, you'll see that we already have like a little bit of a skybox and some sort of terrain, so not a lot, but we have a little bit. So this window is the game window. Notice that my tabs here in the middle, I could click back to my scene editor or back to my game being played, but as long as this play button is pressed, my game is active. So I could actually be using a lot of resources and maybe make myself have some unusual things happen if I'm using the game editor window while the game is playing, but you can. So now if I click the play button again, it does stop playing and it switches back to my scene window. Now if I want my game to start up in full screen, I could click on my game tab and I can choose this setting, maximize on play, and now when I play my game, it'll be full screen within Unity. Yes, sir?
I don't think you're sharing.
Am I not sharing? Oh, darn, thank you.
Yeah, there's like 4 squares on the screen right now.
Okay. Oh, it's just being, I see what you're saying. That one. Now am I sharing it in Zoom? Okay.
No.
No. Just nowhere, just fail, fail.
It started to, it flashed on and off a couple times, then you stayed off.
Just quit, huh? Let's try that again. Okay, is Zoom working?
There we go.
Ah, shoo, sorry. All right, we got everything back. Let's try it. So anyways, it is this little button up here, maximize on play. Now I can be in play mode, and then I can still change that button. Nothing happens until I leave play mode and resume again. So that maximize on play option has to be set before you start playing the game. You also can see some other options here in your game window, like muting your audio, looking at your stats, and different gizmos, which we'll get to in a minute. Notice also there's a scale setting here where you could zoom in and see additional details when you're looking at your play window. We have some other options that have to do with our display. Let's go back to our scene editor window. Now in the scene editor window, we see the light that we have in our scene that Unity put in here by default for us. And we see the camera in our scene that Unity put in here by default. Both of those game objects also show up in the hierarchy window. Our hierarchy window, if you notice, says that I have a main camera and a directional light. If I wanted to change settings for those, I could click on them, and I could click on them over here in the hierarchy window or in the game design window, either way. But right now I just clicked on my directional light that was added automatically for me. And in the inspector window now, I see all of the different property settings that I have available for that type of of light, right? So I could change it to be a different color instead of white light. I could have different shadowing. So I can change those kinds of characteristics by looking at the inspector window for my light game object. Now, if I look at my camera, my main camera, then in the inspector window, I'll see all of the settings and things that I can use for my main camera. Notice in my main camera too, is where I have the setting that it's showing that skybox in the background sort of thing. And I could change some of those settings really easily, quickly to make it show something different. Let's change our background. See if we can make it. I'm going to click on this background setting in the inspector. And I can try some different colors. And notice how it's changing in the inspector window as I change that. And then I could run it, see if I had any impact. Nope. Because this camera is doing some other things as far as how it's setting up that skybox. So we'd have to mess with a few more settings. So notice that sometimes when you change things, it doesn't necessarily have an immediate impact because there can be other features of Unity that are involved in what you're seeing. So we'll be looking at those kinds of things, how we can change and make everything exactly the way we want it. Now I could move some things around if I wanted to. What happens if we delete the light? It would be pretty dark all up in there, wouldn't it? You can try it. You won't see much. Now if you delete your light, I could just click on it in the hierarchy screen and I can delete from there. When I run, say it's going to be super ugly. I still have my horizon, right? And I can still see a little bit of ambient light, but not the same kind of lighting as I could see before. So how could I add it back in? I could just do a game object that I want to add a light, just a directional light, and put it back in there. And that should be pretty much the same default settings as that original directional light had. So let's make a Hello World game thing, sort of app. Just like every other programming language, we're going to start out with some code. So let's create a C# script. In this script, we're not going to do very much, so it doesn't really matter what your background is, because we should all be able to do it. We want to create something, and we're going to create it in our projects area. So in our projects area, you should see the create drop down. And what we want to create is a C# script. So let's choose that. When we say that we want to create a C# script, notice it drops a new C# script in our assets folder. That's the folder that we were looking at that we had open. And that script is in rename mode, right? I can rename it right now. So let's name it what we want it to be named. And we'd like it to be Hello World. Yes, sir? Is it not? Hang on. That's what it did to me.
Make sure you click on, you right click, go to assets. Now here you go. Yeah, you can use your packages.
I don't think I did it right then. See if you might do UI. What is that created?
Now, when you do that create, check, make sure it says C# script. You should see this C# icon on it, and it should be named hello world.cs. Look down here at the bottom. Notice mine. You can see it in the Zoom window. Is it showing? Grab a computer beside you and bring up that Zoom session. Here it says, my script is named hello world.cs.cs. That's not good. That's not what I want. I need to get rid of one of those .cs's. I typed it and I didn't need to, so I'll go back to rename mode and get rid of that so that in my view, it just says hello world. But if I look at it in the project screen down at the bottom in the info display, it's showing me the real name is helloworld.cs.
So it's automatic.
Yes, it's automatic. Everybody got one created. Did it work? Did it okay? All right. Nope, nope. Trouble? So let's put some code in that script. We would like, in a perfect world, we'll see, we'd like to double click on this script and have it open Visual Studio for us to edit it.
I reinstalled it.
Is it going to work?
So it said I had a license was out of date or some crap and it's reinstalling.
Nice. What's it reinstalling?
Oh, Visual Studio.
I don't think it'll let you. Let's see what
Well,
it's
it's
doing.
going through.
It's doing something,
Yeah,
huh?
it's going through this everything, so it's almost done. We'll see.
Okay, so let's close because look, it's trying to open Visual Studio 2010. I don't want
Oh,
that.
that is 2010.
So I'm gonna
It
close.
still opens, no,
Let it go?
run through and it'll open.
Will it do it?
Yeah, mine
you
opened
just gotta let it
2017.
run through.
Let it run through it?
Yeah, it did take about a couple minutes,
Okay.
maybe 3 or 4.
Should we use 2017 or?
2017 if it gets there, but I haven't seen it.
Close
So.
it, and then it'll process it through to 2017.
It's close that first box.
It's still doing it.
Mine work.
Yay.
Wait.
Now, if you've got Visual Studio open, good. You should be seeing this little C# script, hopefully little. Might have a few extra things around it. Now, while this is running, let me point out a few other things here on the screen. When you're working in Unity, Unity is 3D. So if I were working in a beautiful graph for my math class, and I had a point, and my math teacher said this was at 2, 2, and this point was at -2, 2, I don't know, something like that. We have these different axes, right? Is this the x-axis or the y-axis?
Why?
What about this one?
X.
X. Well, that's only 2 dimensions, X and Y. So what is my third dimension? Z. And it's how close or far it is, right? So whenever we work with locations, we're going to be having that third dimension, our Z dimension. So remember in Unity, anytime our code is changing the Z location, it's moving an object closer or further away. So we have that great capability. This gizmo tool up here, if you see it, notice it has X, Y, and Z. And that's giving you different options for the perspective of your view of this scene design window. So you can use that gizmo tool for a lot of different things for switching around your perspective. You want to look at it from above so you can make sure that everything's stacked up properly. You can use that gizmo tool to real easy change your view. So that's going to be stuff that you'll want to look at those Unity tutorials to get some really in-depth information about. Very helpful. And you kind of have to just try it and get the feel of it, you know, and kind of see how it all works. Otherwise, it doesn't really mean a lot to you. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I ended up with a, like, notepad.
I think you have to open it manually in 2017.
Let's do it. Let's open Visual Studio.
Are we gonna manually create that link, or are we just?
No, we'll let it do it. Now, last year, once Visual Studio was open, if we double-clicked on something in Unity, it seemed to work right. Because it's not installed, of course, exactly properly-ish. And it won't let us do anything about it.
Wanting to do the show.
There it goes.
You just hit close and cancel again?
Did you already do the install?
Yeah, I let it go the first time and it sent me the know if that was good.
Yeah, it's just not working. Okay, so let's look at our settings.
Mine took me to 2017.
It did?
Yeah.
Yeah, mine directly.
Huh.
I did see that Visual Studio has the option to attach.
Yes.
You can get through that.
So I don't know if we can manually create that link between.
No, we can't. We don't have security. Because no matter what we do, we have to install something. I'm thinking that there was a setting, though, somewhere in Unity. There we go. All right. Go to Edit, Preferences, and when you get to the Unity Preferences, it's going to be sitting at General. We want to go to External Tools. And do you see that External Script Editor?
Yeah.
Let's change that. And I want to browse. And now we're going to have to go find Visual Studio 2017. So this is kind of a long path. Go to this PC and the C drive. And I think it's in Program Files,
Program files x86.
x86. Because we really want to go to Program Files x86, Microsoft Visual Studio 14.0, Common 7, IDE. Is there? Where's that?
Like the actual computer settings and default, value settings.
You go to default programs.
Yeah, for it's choosing the default to open certain file.
Oh, okay.
And then just go down to that CIS220.
We will do that.
Yeah, but in any case, it's considered 20 as well over the 5.
Did it? Open Fine?
Just click on the box next to that CIS.
No, it's still tries to open here.
Mm-hmm.
I did that for me.
It opened the right one. Now, once it got to that point, I'll let it see. Yeah, we might need to do that too.
Yeah, mine's not bad.
So I don't think
I'm going to wait and see what it does, and then we'll feed it into submission here.
So I noticed that I exited out of Visual Studio, then I double click back on that again.
Mm-hmm.
And try to do that whole install crap again. So I hit close cancel, I'm still part of 17 and have the file ready.
Did it?
I
Okay.
got a quick way to do it.
How's that?
So
There it
open up
goes.
your studio, right?
Uh-huh.
Then right click, go to properties, just copy and paste its target file, and then do what you were doing inside of Unity
Mm-hmm.
in that preference, and then like when you hit browse, just copy and paste the target file.
I tried that, but it said that this location cannot be opened in this program.
Don't put it in the top, put it in the bottom.
Well, let's do it the correct way. So go in Unity to edit and edit preferences where we were earlier, because this is really what we want to correct.
That's
Right.
what I did.
Yeah.
And then you copy, and then you just paste that target
Yeah.
location.
And then change your external script editor to browse
You can also do by file.
or open by file extension.
Yeah, that fixed it for me.
That fixed it. Let's do that, because then we've set that file extension CS to open Visual Studio 17 like Isaac said. So between the two of them, that should be right. Try it. Little bit of conflict here for us. Now mine just opened right back up, but I got to close out of everything and make sure it really worked right. Let's try it again. There it goes. Maybe.
We opened the,
Yeah,
we set the
stop with that install crap.
What a mess. Okay, so we went to our settings and we did how to open files, what program opens files, and then we picked .cs and set it to Visual Studio 2017. And then we went in Unity and said to open by file type. This is one of our most complicated things. Make sure everybody's got it where it's working.
once you got it installed, the enterprise .cs.
I learned what I do.
When I did. Exit out, it's showing. Yeah, when that strong tools to open by file.
That's
right. Very like it.
See if that works. There you go. Try it that way.
Your .cs is still on there.
Oh, yours looks good. I'm looking at mine. See what?
Your .cs is still on the file.
Oh,
There you go.
I've got to fix it. I just messed up all sorts of stuff typing that .cs, didn't I? I'll get it fixed. So whenever we're working with Unity, just like any other game engine, there is a life cycle. And we have different events that happen at different times. So our game start might be an event, and in Unity, it is a start event. Whenever we're working, we can put code in the start event. That means that code will execute when the game starts. Whenever there's a refresh, a screen refresh, you know, you guys have that, your refresh rate. And,
Frames per second.
yeah, frames per second. That's going to initiate a call to the update method. And so your update method is going to run every time there's a frame update. So we have other lifecycle events in Unity, but that's where these two are coming in. And these are the ones that Unity just automatically put in the code for you when you get started. So for our new programmers, when we're looking at C#, we're not going to worry too much about all of this stuff up here. We're going to focus in on these methods here that have the actions where we're going to put the code when these events occur. So first, let's try our start method. So in our start method, we want to put a new line of code. So if I click there in Visual Studio, I just want this to print something out to the console. So I'm going to use the print command in Unity. And the print command expects to be passed a parameter of the information that should be printed. And we want it to print out hello world. Now I've got some weird light bulb action over here. It says Rosalind, you know, the took in charge of Visual Studio 2017. Doesn't think this code is exactly pristine, but I'm going to ignore that at this point.
It wants to use a lambda.
Does it? Ignore it, because that's not going to work in Unity. So let's save, because if we don't save these updates we just made to our code in Visual Studio, it won't be updated in Unity. So now that I've saved, I should be able to do something and make something happen in Unity. But right now, nothing's going to happen even if I have that script set. I have to tell Unity to run that script. And when do I want to run that script? Well, I'd like to run that script when the game starts. And my game has one camera. So if I attach my script to my camera, then I know that my script is going to run. Now I can attach scripts to things in a lot of different ways, but the easy way is to drag and drop. So first I'm going to click on my game object, my game camera, then I'm going to grab my Hello World script and I'm going to drop it onto my game camera. Oh, but I can't see it, so I've got to go down a little bit. Where are you?
You could have just let it go anywhere.
Anywhere in there? Oh,
Underneath your audio list.
is that fine? Okay.
Yeah.
I was getting too fancy. Sorry, I was like, look at this, woohoo, and then I got all distracted. So now I've attached my Hello World script to my game camera. So now when the camera starts running, the script is going to start running. So let's run our game. Now I don't see anything happening. I need to look at the console. So my console is where the print statement output is going to go. So here it is. Here's my Hello World message. It just printed once because I put it in my start method. So that only gets run once when the game starts. So if I want that to happen more than once as my game is executing, I need to put that code someplace else. So let's try it. I'm going to edit my script again, but I don't see it. How can I edit it if I don't see it to double click on it? How can I find it? Yep, go back to my project tab. And then if everything else is closed, I might even have to open my assets folder. But there's my C# script. I'm going to double click it to open it and edit it again. So I want to have the same kind of code, but this time it's going to be in my update. So I'm going to say I want to print Hello World update. Now I want to save this. And what I'm doing is when I work in Visual Studio, I'm just minimizing, because otherwise it has to go through all that process of reopening Visual Studio when I double click on my C# script. And that's not that big of a deal with these computers. Remember, they're just like, 8 weeks old or something. And your computer at home might not be quite that new. So you might see a noticeable delay when you double click to open that Visual Studio script. So you could just keep Visual Studio open, just minimize it. Now let's run our game again in Unity. And now if I look at the console, I should see my update message occurring every time my frame is refreshed. So now I'm seeing a whole bunch of updates. So we got some action going, yay. So let's stop it. Is it working for everybody?
Yeah.
All working? Okay, good. Trouble? Trouble? Trouble?
I'm trying to, when I was clicking the script over, for some reason it was giving this error message.
Greg, you don't do that here. There, you do it in the inspector.
Oh, okay.
Good point. Yeah, you have to be looking at your camera that's in the inspector, and then you can drag something and attach it. So it's really picky about how you do that. It's super flexible, but really picky. So click on your camera first. Now those things, those kind of connections are hard in Unity, those inspector connections where we say, this game object has this script, or this game object has this material. Yes, sir? Trouble? What's the matter? Oh, I just doing that. Okay.
There was a, I know in the, over here, there's like a comma.
Oh,
I only have the auto. Is there? I guess.
push down.
All right, 16. So let's create a basic emitter. So in our project, let's create a new scene. These guys are fixing something here, just a sec. What's the matter?
Make sure his last name is the same as his file name, or we won't run either.
Oh, okay, it's within lines.
It says in, where's your t-shirt file? Is it in your contacts?
Oh, say hello or.
Alex, let's go ahead and create a new scene and then you can come back to this one because we'll do about the same thing here. So let's do file, new scene. Now, do we want to save our changes? Now, notice my changes didn't even end up in the right scene because I was worried about restarting my computer. So it's really easy to get them in the wrong place. So we have to be super careful about where we're putting things. So we're clicking around, click back. Okay, so we've got a new scene here. It's named Untitled. So shall we name it?
Yeah.
Let's name it. File, save, scene. We want this one to be underscore scene underscore 1. And I did go into the scenes folder. In our textbook, it doesn't really mention whether you should go into the scenes folder, but it would seem logical that you would want to save all of your scenes in that folder. Now, when I'm looking at my new scene, notice some things. I can still see the C# script I created for the last scene, right? It didn't like wipe all that stuff out because this is a project level asset. It belongs to the whole project. Now, in this new scene though, my main camera is a new main camera and it doesn't have the script associated with it anymore, right? So it looks just the same, but it's not the same because it's a brand new camera. So remember some things, whatever is in your hierarchy window is for this specific scene. Yes, sir?
Mine still has the function.
So what? So are you looking at your new scene one up here? But it still has the script associated with your main camera?
Yeah.
That's no good.
Or you duplicated your last scene.
Yeah, it might have duplicated. So
Just erase the script.
try it again. Sometimes Unity has some bugs when you're doing things, or it might just be something like that. But it should have a whole new camera and a whole new everything.
Okay, so it's weird. It's saying that outside of the actual scene together.
Right, because it didn't, for some reason, when you go to save scene, it didn't take you into that scene folder. I had to actually double click to go into it and then save that scene. So if you didn't do that, it would just save it there in the project folder and you might see it as a weird floaty asset. Now, moving scenes and things when you're dragging and dropping like that can be okay, can also cause trouble. So always remember if you're going to do major reorganization like that of your project, to take a backup first. Copy that whole folder and then get in there and start moving things around.
To go from this project folder to.
Right. Yeah, because that's where you want to do it, but don't do it unless you backed up that whole project folder because it might get really, really messed up. So it can happen easy. We always want a lot of backups. If you're using GitHub for any of your other classes, GitHub is a great way for you to store all of your code, your project out on the cloud so that you can get to it from home. Yes, sir?
They should, like, the camera one sheet should have some
It shouldn't. We'll have to watch. We might have a bug or something in Unity that hasn't been updated. So you guys watch that problem with those scenes and things because we might have some maintenance that needs to be installed on Unity, and we usually can get the IT staff to do that if we find some weird bugs or something like these scene objects not handling things properly. So let's create our Hello World application to be a little bit more involved, a little more 3D. I want to create like an emitter. So we're going to create something where, in some of you that are in C# in some of the classes, you might have seen me show that emitter when we're talking about object-oriented programming, because we're going to emit objects, right? So we can either emit like little cube objects or circle objects, sphere objects, whatever you want. They do a cube in your text, so you can change it however you want, but I'll do what they do. So we're going to add a game object. And we want it to be a 3D object. And like I said, I'll just use a cube. So now here's my cube sitting in my scene builder. I could run my game here, run my scene, and now I see this cube sitting here in the middle, so that's fine. Now whenever I'm working with an object like this, notice that it uses the default material, which is kind of just this weird white. So we could change that, and you'll see how to do it pretty easily. Just realize it's not the same as just setting something to a background color or a foreground color, because in Unity you're using a material. Is it bubbly? Is it rough? Is it smooth? Is it specular? Does it have reflection? All those kinds of things can be set for your different materials. So it's not just a color, it's a lot more than that. But here I've got this dumb 3D cube just sitting in the middle of my scene, which is fine. I don't need to do anything other weird things with it. Once I create this 3D object, you should see that cube in your hierarchy window now. And let's click on it there. I'll click on my cube here. Now, if I wanted to rename it to be something better, like my game cube or cube 75 or something like that, I could do that over there in the hierarchy window. But once we click on our cube, remember the inspector window is going to be showing us all of the properties about our cube. So we should be able to see its position on the XYZ axis. Notice that its position always begins at 0, 0, 0. I could move it if I wanted to using this transform position. So if I wanted to move it, you know, 57, I could, or I can just use the tool to drag and move my object. Yes, sir.
My arrows aren't coming up. I can't really.
When you click on it, what's it?
Oh wait, got it. I was on the scale tool instead of the move tool. I'm sorry.
That's all right, and that's a good point too, because we have so many tools available that sometimes it can, you know, be like it's fighting with you, and it's just because you're looking at the scaling instead of the moving. And all of those are these icons up over here in the corner that are really important in you working with your game and moving things around. So you'll see a lot of information about all of the different tools as you go through your different videos, and you guys will have to help me with them sometimes. But here's my cube. I could move it around if I wanted to, and I see all of the characteristics of it. Its transform position tells us where it is, how big it is. The mesh is what the people see from the outside, right? It's like the skin that's covering something. And right now it's just meshed as a cube, so that's fine. It has some lighting capability, materials capability. So I could change some things really quickly on this cube if I wanted to. Again, as far as using different materials. Right now it's set as a collider. So that means it does have a physical being. If it ran into a tree or something, the tree would be able to tell. If I told the tree, it could tell, depending on whether it was a collider object. But it is a collider object, but right now it's not a trigger to any sort of collision action. Phew, lots of stuff there just for our basic cube. So we can do many, many things with it, looking at all of those different inspector properties. What we're going to do, though, is add a little bit of capability to our cube, even though it has all these capabilities. We want to make it a rigid body. And the rigid body component tells Unity that we want physics to be simulated for this game object. Things like gravity and those kinds of physics. Gravity, friction, collisions, and drag. So let's add it. Over here in our inspector window, when you have your cube selected, click Add Component, and we want to find some sort of physics, and we want it to be a rigid body. Do you find those? Yeah. So now in your inspector, you can see this rigid body characteristic has been added to the cube. And it has more inspector properties that we could change. So we could make it not use gravity if we didn't want it to. We could increase its drag. You know, some of those physics properties we could change just here in the inspector, or we could change them in our code on the fly. Now if we run our game, does our cube do anything different?
Keep falling until
it falls. So if it's still floating, it's not a rigid body. You have diet camera.
Yep, I use this internet.
Yours is.
That your camera has to be pointing at it. Because on your camera. But you can try putting one in and see what happens. I don't know what it would do. I'm not sure. I think you would just see the inside of your computer just drop. But you sure try it. You can, oh, try it. We can.
I turn the camera off separately.
If you oh, you think it,
Yeah, I know. When you do that,
then it needs something else to push it.
I tried setting the camera outside the rigid body gravity, so now it's falling like this.
So you can't tell.
I wonder could you make the camera, maybe that's not third person.
Yeah, third person is all of that object. Exactly, right, it's on it.
Okay, good, good, good. It's dropping like a rock. That's what we want. So notice that rigid body characteristic makes us be something that is impacted by all those physics. Now, when you're using Unity, there's some physics stuff that they specify in your book. 1 unit of distance equals 1 meter. So whenever we're coding, we need to remember those kinds of things. 1 unit of mass equals 1 kilogram. The default gravity of negative 9.8 is considered in the downward negative y direction. And an average human character is about 2 units or 2 meters tall. So those are things that are just measures and weights that matter in Unity. So we can have those things be meaningful to us. Okay, so cool. We got our cube dropping, and we saw that our directional light is already included. We'll look at those more. But let's use our cube to make a prefab. And a prefab is like a reusable element. So if I got my cube all set up a certain color with a certain characteristics, and I've added my rigid body and all of its settings, now I can save that as a prefab so that I can reuse it over and over and over within my project. So it's just a reusable element. It's like a template. So we want this to become a prefab. So let's click on our cube in our hierarchy pane. And it is so easy to make a prefab. All we got to do is drag our cube and drop it on our projects pane. Now the cube that is in my projects pane is now a prefab. It's not the same cube that's in my game, because the one that's in my game is the one that's up here in this hierarchy window. This one down here is a prefab that looks just like it that I could use over and over and over in the same way. Now, whenever I want to make one of those cubes show up on the screen, I need to make it an active object, object-oriented programming. So I want to instantiate one of those cubes to make it show up on my screen. So let's make sure we're doing it right. I want to point out over here in our hierarchy that it turned blue. That means that it's right now the same as the prefab or an instance of a prefab. So it is the same, but let's delete it. Ooh, there went everything in my inspector and all that stuff. My cube is just gone. Now what happens if I run my game? Nothing. Nothing. There's nothing there. So I need to do some code to make something happen. Let's create another C# script. Can you remember how? Assets. Then what? Create C# script. Perfect. And let's name this one Cube Spawner. And we do not need .cs, right? And when we name our C# script, it's actually going to internally make a class for that same name. So we want to make sure we don't put any spaces in our names. And now that I've got that Cube Spawner script created, I'm going to double click on it to open it in Visual Studio. Now it looks just like the last script that we created when we started out. It's blank, just has these 2 methods in it. It's not, and it has space for us to put some code that's going to happen when our game starts, and space for us to put some code that's going to happen when an update occurs. So let's create a variable. We're going to create a variable. And this variable, usually when we create variables, you know, when we're working with strongly typed programming languages like C# and Java, we always have to say what data type this variable is. We're working with loosely typed, like Python and things, we'll let them figure it out. But since we're working with C#, we have to say what type of object this variable is going to be. Well, it's not going to be like an integer or a string. It's going to be a game object. I need the word public first. Now, I want this game object to be named cube prefab var. So kind of a long name. Now, when I create variables in C#, right within my class, they're not within a specific method, right? They become class level variables. They're like global throughout this whole set. There's some other cool things that happen with these variables when we're using Unity. If we make them public like this, they're going to show up in Inspector. So in the Inspector, we would be able to change the values of these variables that we create as class level variables up at the top of our code. So now we've created a variable that's going to hold a game object. So let's do it first, just our start. I want to use this special keyword, instantiate. And again, Visual Studio, Rosalind is going to complain about it because this is a Unity statement. And when I use the instantiate verb, I have to say what I want to instantiate. Well, we want to instantiate this new variable we just created. Right now, this variable, if you notice, doesn't have anything. We just said it's a game object, but really it's just empty, right? So let's save this, and I'll show you how we can make it have our cube. So I've saved it. Now I'm going to go back to Unity. In Unity, I want to associate that script that we just created with our camera. So we'll go to our main camera and drag that cube spawner script and drop it on that main camera. Now notice this time, beside the script showing up, we see that we have this cube prefab variable, this game object underneath it. It says, hey, I see this variable. You can get to it from Inspector. It's cube prefab variable, but it doesn't have any value. It says none, nothing is given. So let's give it a value. Let's say, well, I think you should use my cube prefab. Okay, so now we've said a cube prefab variable is a cube. So now when we run, we should see our cube show up. I did it too fast. Shows up, disappears, drops like a rock. Okay, is it showing up for everybody? See it? See it?
Nice.
Yeah, it works. Right after voice. It's SCANT. Parentheses, put Q.
Yeah. I need to see it.
Yeah. Yeah. You should show that.
Okay, good. All right, so I'm gonna issue there. So how could we make that cube get repeatedly generated?
Put it in the update.
Put it in the update. Let's try it. I'll make a new one there in my update, and I'm going to save and run. And then since physics affects them, as they crash around, they can bump into each other and do some things, right? Can make some great things happen. So that looks really cool. So what about creating some other aspects of it? Let's do it. Okay, if everybody's is working, let's put a ground in here, something to land on. What? We just copied it. Yeah, just copy that one line of code. Working? Oh my goodness. Cube file. Oh, yours, see, yours isn't all going up. The sphere, that's why. The sphere is a little bit better at not getting bumped up. Huh? All right, so let's put some ground. We need a land here for things to land on so they don't just keep falling away from nowhere. So on your scene, let's go ahead and create another cube. Notice that in our hierarchy, we don't have any cube objects, so we don't have to worry about it getting confused with that other one because we made it into a prefab and now we only use it in our code. So it's not in our hierarchy window anymore. But let's create a new one. I'm going to go game object, 3D object, cube. And then for my cube, I want to do a little bit of changing for this one because I would like for it to be the ground. So let's rename it as such. Over here in the hierarchy window, click again to go into rename mode and name it ground. Ground. Now it says with the ground object selected in the scene pane, press the W, E, or R to move, rotate, or scale the game object. Try it. Try your keystrokes. W, didn't do nothing for me. E changes the tool to the rotate tool. Is that the rotate tool? R to scale. So W is giving us our translate, which is move. E is rotate, the rotate tool. And then R takes you to the scale tool, which will make the cube bigger or smaller. So you can try those different tools. And those are all, again, these tools that are up here at the top, but you can get to them from keystrokes. Now, try the T key. Notice what it does. And Q is another keystroke that takes you to the hand move tool, you know, where you can move things around using your kind of hand. So the hand tool is moving around what you are looking at in your scene editor window, not moving your specific game object. Now we want to move our game object. Whoops, I got off of my ground. So for our ground, we would like it to be in a specific location. So we can use the move tools, or we can use these transform positions in the inspector. And I'm going to use those just so that you can see where I'm putting things. I want 0, -4, 0 in my position. My rotation, I want 0, 0, 0. In my scale, I want 10, 1, 10. And you should notice that ground gets spread out there so you can see it a little bit. So notice how it's moving. Change, you're going to play with all of these tools. It's going to be something that you mess with a lot. So let's try it. What does that do? That new thing in our scene. Yep, so it's an actual, like a platform, isn't it? So I'm going to stop running, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit here and see if I can change my position of my game. I'm not looking at the right thing. So they say as long as you don't add a rigid body, you'll get some nice bouncing and things like that. We could try moving things around. Putting an emitter on there to actually have a spot where our cubes come from. So there's lots of different things that we could try and do. So that's a really good spot for us to stop here today. That gives you guys about 30 minutes, kind of mess around with things, think about how you want to do stuff. Before we do that though, let's talk about what you need to have been doing before next time. So you're going to be working on just getting familiar with Unity more. But if we look at our calendar, week 5 is when we'd like our first presentations. So that's in February. We still have quite a bit of time, but we have a lot to do between now and then. So what we need to start working on is this apple picker walkthrough. So between now and next time, make sure that you're feeling comfortable with Unity and the tools in Unity, and take a look at the beginning of the apple picker walkthrough. We'll try and do it together in class. So we'll start at the beginning next time. We won't start at a specific place, but next time we'll get, you know, to a certain spot there in the game, and then I will expect you to keep moving on your own after that, and we'll pick up at a certain location after that so that we can get it all done. But we want to start that one together with everybody working on it, so make sure you're taking a look at it. The info here gives you some information about the Unity lifecycle. When we were running our Unity projects, we had put code in the start method. That happens at startup of your game. Then our updates have multiple places. We use this update method. Fixed update will happen one fixed time per frame, or you can read through all of these different options. But we actually have more than one update capability that occur at different points. Then we can also have things happen when an object is being rendered, if they have some sort of rendering required. And then we can have on GUI methods that can be called multiple times to build the GUI. So like Alex was mentioning when he was logging into the Unity, they have some really nice interfaces. And so even just creating a GUI app using Unity is kind of neat. You can make it look really cool and have a lot of interesting features for the user that you can't really get with other applications and things. So questions? Yes, sir?
Actually, never mind. I was just, I guess I was needing some help afterwards.
Okay. Question, sir?
Yeah, I don't know what I did wrong.
Sure. Everybody else is keep trying stuff and experimenting and figuring out how things work.
find out.
Hello world. For some reason, I ran it like 17 times, and when I hit play, it shows you.
So right over here, in the script, it shows that area. And we want to put something in that drive, so that's grab your two, and drop it there.
Oh,
It's associated with that, so now try it and show those connections in the inspector are can be really easy to miss. And make all the difference. And sometimes Unity doesn't keep that. So yeah, let's make sure you save your scene and save your project so we can try to open it next time and make sure it doesn't come.
Click on.
I want to say this one.
Did you create that?
Yeah.
Let's create one. I didn't say, oh, hey, it's game time.
Those are
Did you
colors.
say that? Oh, wait, it's game class. He's like, what?
Wait, so I want to just down here.
He's the creative one. He's pulling the trigger.
No, see, that's showing where it's supposed to spawn.
Oh my goodness,
Oh,
what
that's
is
what it's
that?
like. It's the one next to it.
That's a good start.
And I guess people are layers.
But actually, this.
Oh.
You don't need it. Yeah, I don't know
The one
what's
that's
that
up there,
one.
you don't need access.
Are you gonna make it like blood red and stuff?
Yeah, no, this is the exact.
Oh, okay.
This one is the one that I just see it show.
Like the true.
So you know
blood.
what yeah. Should I say why is
You missed that?
Oh, sorry.
You're fine.
Well, I'd rather keep it in that set. So I can do
oh, okay, it's there.
There's a problem with trying to attach.
It's showing there.
Uh-huh.
It's like the code can be attached to like the camera.
But the code, right?
Because it wasn't this long. I wasn't sure what.
I know that's just trying to figure out how to get some associated.
Right again.
We'll yell at
This not what you. Oh.
I see.
Oh, ragdoll's already, yes. Another rat. Well, you can still create a prefab type thing, something like that.
Need to have a script out there. And nothing's happening.
That's the way we are.
I know you can do, you can make it colors, nice colors for each.
Oh, class, that's what we're
He actually wanted us to be on.
You want it to be on that zero.
So like, he moved
Oh, you have to do them separate too. I was thinking.
He doesn't, it's just not.
Okay, so.
And I know,
So share that a little bit. Yeah.
it still counts as.
So what I'm trying to say is like,
Yeah,
I
it's
have
just-
the rectangle there, actually.
No, you see, I don't, I've just got a cylinder down here. And
Like,
it's
so
right
it
here.
has that
It's still.
one
Extra
right
one,
there.
there's next door.
Right.
Yeah,
I
it's all right.
have a halo but what I did is I got made a material and drag it. But what it is,
Take control too.
See what he says, this is.
cut out a
Oh, that's why
I know that word is short.
no wonder. What's the let's see. I mean, they could just be up here in the
We knew they leapfrog each other. So last time we knew.
When it floats, when a radial system, you can use a radial system on this.
Oh, I guess let's see. Yeah, let's see if that's. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
How big is that? For some reason, that's what's weird.
So let's add it.
Zoom in to raise and see the camera. Okay. Scroll. Look around. Oh my gosh, they're that tiny.
You just made them so small you couldn't see it.
Oh, wow.
I guess that's what it is.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and check. So we go back here.
Here.
You use the center square.
Oh, you see it. Large. Resize. Oh, this is what I do it.
Here's researching so critical. Center square.
Okay.
Maybe you'll see it.
Okay. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. It's for me. We got one. We got two. Come.
There you go.
It's smoking out everywhere. It's soft. Time works. Perfect. Now I'll save this. Oh, wait, it changed based on that.
Yeah. Because that's what you guys sign this.
Yeah, that's right. The game. Now let's drag game and drag it like way on the.
Did you drag the table back down?
Oh, I didn't. That's what
Save it. And then if you don't want that one, just get rid of this one. There's not.
Where are they?
Oh,
Where they are.
okay.
Crap.
Get them updated.
Okay, I'm gonna make them a little smaller. I'm gonna make them smaller.
Oh, you're getting into that too? Very nice. What have you done? That was cool. That looks really neat. Oh my goodness, I like that. Oh, it's really
There's a lot of new parts. I made it way too big. How much was that? Apparently, apparently it worked.
Oh, you did have it.
It's the funniest thing.
What?
It's the funniest thing. It was so small, you couldn't see it. It was at the default size, it was about the size of a atom.
Are you hoping that falls down in the market?